What if the demons you were warned to fear were not hunters in the dark, but fragments of yourself sealed awakes hidden in the shadows, waiting to be claimed? Since childhood, you were told their names must never be spoken, that their sigils scratched into parchment could summon ruin. That to even look at the Ars Goetia was to open a door that must remain shut. But what if the Forbidden Book was never a catalog of monsters at all? What if it was a mirror 72 reflections of the human psyche? Each demon, an archetype exiled, demonized, and buried, yet still whispering from beneath the floorboards of consciousness. The Church declared them legions of hell, each sigil a contract with damnation. But in older times, before fear was codified into law, spirits like these were called daimons, guides, teachers, fragments of destiny. Socrates confessed that he listened to one. Later, the empire burned that lineage and branded every shadow as enemy. From then on, to question was rebellion, to desire was corruption, to claim sovereignty was blasphemy. The Goetia became a blacklist of forbidden powers. Your own power shut away behind locks of terror. Imagine now, a page turning in secret, a sigil glowing in candlelight, and a realization stirring in the marrow of your bones. These are not demons come to destroy you, they are shadows demanding recognition. Contracts awaiting renegotiation, masks hiding faces that look suspiciously like your own. The question is not whether they exist, but whether you will keep fearing the fragments, or dare to face them and walk whole into the forbidden mirror. To understand the Ars Goetia, you must first understand the architecture that made demons what they are in our imagination. For the book is not merely a list of 72 spirits, but a blueprint of how shadow was captured, distorted, and weaponized. This is the architecture of evil, not the spirits themselves, but the system that rebranded them as enemies, ensuring that humanity would forever fear its own reflection. The origin lies in the Greek word daimon. Far from being monstrous, a daimon was a guiding presence, an intermediary between mortal and divine. Socrates claimed he listened to his personal daimon, a voice of restraint and counsel. For the ancients, these spirits were neither holy nor evil. They were forces, ambiguous but necessary, channels through which destiny could speak. They were mirrors, not masks. But when empires rose that demanded obedience, ambiguity became dangerous. The Church needed binaries: God versus Satan, angels versus demons, obedience versus rebellion. Subtlety erodes authority. Ambivalence breeds sovereignty. And so, the architecture of evil began its construction. The Goetia's spirits were once complex archetypes. Boer, associated with healing and herbs, became twisted into monstrous figure. Asmodeus, Lord of Desire, was recast as corrupter of men. Belial, emblem of sovereignty, was demonized into spirit of lawlessness. Each name, each face, each sigil was repurposed. Their original roles, as reflections of human drives, embodiments of natural forces, were erased. In their place stood caricatures of terror. The message was clear: to engage with these fragments was to risk damnation. Thus, the system controlled not only behavior, but imagination itself. The brilliance of this architecture was its integration into ritual. Every exorcism reinforced the binary: light against darkness, priest against demon, obedience against chaos. Every sermon retold the myth, reminding the faithful that curiosity could summon corruption, that lust was gateway to possession, that rebellion opened doors to infernal legions. The very act of believing renewed the contract. The people did not need to see demons to fear them. The architecture had built an edifice of terror inside the psyche itself. This edifice thrived on inversion. Natural drives were recoded as sin. Desire was relabeled as lust, sovereignty as arrogance, curiosity as blasphemy. Each inversion hollowed out the human spirit, leaving it fractured. The fragments were then projected outward, painted as external enemies. The demon was not out there. It was inside, disowned, exiled, and then hunted as other. The architecture ensured that people would forever fight themselves, bleeding energy into the system that demanded their obedience. When the Ars Goetia emerged in grimoires, it was branded as forbidden catalog. Yet look closely and you see something else. A taxonomy of human shadow, carefully named and sigilled. Each spirit embodies what society exiled: danger, desire, sovereignty, forbidden knowledge. To place them in a book and declare it dangerous was to ensure no one would dare to claim those fragments. To summon was not merely ritual, it was rebellion against the architecture itself. The book survived precisely because fear gave it power, but its deeper function remained hidden, a mirror of what had been taken from you. The architecture of evil is not static. It adapts. In the Middle Ages, it fueled inquisitions, burning women accused of trafficking with demons. In modernity, it moved into screens, where horror films project goetic archetypes onto glowing walls. Audiences scream, hearts race, fear surges. Ritual repeats, contracts renew. The architecture does not care whether you believe literally in demons, it only cares that you react, that you feed. Whether you tremble in church or laugh nervously in cinema, the architecture harvests the same energy. Yet its fragility lies in exposure. The moment you realize that the demon is not external, but fragment of self, the architecture weakens. The binary collapses. The authority built on fear loses ground. This is why the Goetia was condemned. Not because it revealed monsters, but because it revealed maps of shadow that, if claimed, could make humans whole again. The architecture must forbid this at all costs. It must call shadow evil, label autonomy demonic, paint curiosity as rebellion, and burn any text that suggests otherwise. Its survival depends on your blindness. But once the blueprint is seen, it cannot be unseen. You notice how every sermon about temptation is really a warning against desire. You see how every horror film about possession is really a metaphor for shadow integration gone wrong? You recognize that every exorcism is a ritual to reinforce fear, not to liberate. You begin to ask, who benefits when I fear my own fragments? Who profits when I exile my sovereignty, my passion, my curiosity? The answer is not demons. It is the architecture of evil itself. The Goetia, then, is forbidden not because it is dangerous in the way they told you, but because it is dangerous to the system. If these fragments are reclaimed, if humans stop fearing their own shadows, the architecture collapses. Priests lose power, empires lose obedience, the farm loses its harvest. That is why the names of the 72 spirits were whispered with dread, because to speak them is to acknowledge the pieces you were told never to see. The architecture of evil is vast, but it is also brittle. Its strength lies in fear, and fear can be undone. The moment you look at a demon's sigil and see not a monster, but a fragment, not a threat, but a mirror, you crack the walls. The architecture trembles because its foundation was never truth, it was inversion. The question now is whether you will continue to live inside its edifice or dare to step outside, into the shadow where your fragments wait, ready to return. If the architecture of evil is the prison, then symbols are its bars. They do not merely decorate demonology, they create it. Every horn etched into an image, every sigil drawn in ink, every name whispered in fear is not passive representation, but active spell. The language of symbols is not descriptive, it is operative. It works on the psyche, shaping belief, channeling energy, binding fragments. Consider the sigils of the Ars Goetia. Each spirit is inscribed with the seal circles, lines, arcs that seem abstract, but function as keys. To the uninitiated, they look like scribbles. To the magician, they are addresses, summoning codes, contracts in geometric form. But to the system, they are dangerous because they reveal an unspoken truth. Shadow can be mapped. Fragments of the self can be contacted. The sigil is not just symbol, it is technology, a piece of spiritual circuitry. That is why grimoires were condemned, burned, hidden. They do not simply describe demons, they provide access. Symbols extend beyond parchment. Horns, for instance. To the ancients, horns meant vitality, fertility, the pulse of nature. Pan, horned and wild, was life force embodied. But once horns were demonized, every appearance of them triggered fear. The image was rewritten as monstrous. Symbol once sacred became sigil of terror. From then on, to see horns was to recoil instinctively. The symbol had been successfully inverted. The serpent tells the same story. Across cultures, serpents meant wisdom, regeneration, healing. The staff of Asclepius, the serpent entwined, still marks medicine today. Yet in Genesis, the serpent was recoded into corrupter, whisperer of rebellion. The symbol was not erased. It was rewritten. From wisdom to sin, from guide to demon, the serpent became permanent trigger of suspicion. That one act of symbolic inversion still echoes in every hiss of fear. Lilith, too, embodies symbolic war. Once goddess of autonomy, she was painted as child killer, succubus, demon of the night. Her symbol, woman with wings, serpent at her feet, shifted from independence to horror. Invoke Lilith's name became scandal. The symbol ensured that feminine sovereignty remained demonized. The system did not need to chain women physically. It bound them through symbols, through stories, through archetypes etched in collective psyche. Even Baphomet, drawn centuries later by Eliphas Levi, became battleground of symbols. Depicted as goat-headed figure, arms pointing up and down. Male and female, human and animal, it was not demon, but balanced the reconciliation of opposites. Salve and coagula inscribed on arms meant separation and union, the alchemy of wholeness. Yet the image was seized, branded satanic, circulated as proof of diabolical worship. Once again, integration was reframed as monstrosity. The symbol was stripped of nuance, turned into trigger of fear. This language of symbols extends seamlessly into modernity. Horror films reuse the same imagery. Red eyes glowing in dark, inverted crosses, serpentine shadows slithering across walls. Each trope functions as sigil, reinforcing associations. Audiences may laugh, but their bodies react. Pulse quickens, adrenaline surges, fear bleeds. The symbol bypasses logic, goes straight to nervous system. In this way, film itself becomes ritual, each frame a modern grimoire of fear. Social media memes serve as micro-sigils, a viral image of possession, a meme of horned creature, joke about selling your soul. Each repetition reinforces the archetype. Symbols no longer need parchment, they spread as pixels. Every share is ritual, every laugh is energy, every repetition is contract renewed. The farm of demonology now scales globally, accelerated by algorithms, and yet symbols are never static. They are polyphonic, speaking multiple truths at once. A serpent can be corrupter or healer, depending on context. Horns can mean devil or vitality. Baphomet can terrify or integrate. The system depends on freezing symbols into singular meanings, always forbidden a day. But the awakened recognize their fluidity. They see the goat not as devil, but as nature's fire, the serpent not as tempter, but as wisdom, the sigil not as curse, but as map. By reclaiming meaning, they reclaim fragments. This is why the language of symbols terrifies authority. Words can be debated, arguments refuted, but symbols bypass reason, sear themselves into unconscious. They are more difficult to unlearn, more primal in their command. That is why church is filled with stained glass and statues. That is why courts are lined with flags and seals. That is why corporations spend fortunes on logos. Each symbol is sigil, binding loyalty, feeding obedience. The demon's face is only one mask among thousands. The system speaks symbol fluently, while the herd remains illiterate. To awaken is to become symbol literate again. It's to look at the cross and ask, is this salvation or battery? To look at the serpent and ask, is this sin or wisdom? To look at the sigil of Goetia and ask, is this monster S seal or fragment S map? Each question fractures the architecture. Each reinterpretation starves the farm. The language of symbols can enslave, but it can also liberate. So the next time you see horns, serpent, winged woman, or goat-headed idol, do not flinch. Ask, who taught me to fear this image? What part of myself does this symbol mirror? The forbidden truth is that symbols are mirrors, and mirrors reveal what was hidden. The demon is not in the ink, not in the shape, is in the story attached. To change the story is to change the demon. And to change the demon is to reclaim yourself. Every empire, every religion, every occult order knows the same hidden law. Nothing of value is gained without payment, and the oldest currency is blood. Not only the warm crimson that spills from veins on altars or battlefields, but the invisible blood of fear, shame, guilt, and repression flowing through the human soul. The Ars Goetia, like every forbidden grimoire, was branded dangerous, not only because of what it revealed, but because of what it threatened to redirect. If demons are fragments of the self, then the system has been siphoning your blood, literal and metaphorical, by convincing you that those fragments are enemies. History reeks of blood in the name of demons. During inquisitions, women accused of consorting with spirits were tied to stakes, their flesh turned to ash. Their screams were framed as purification, but in truth, they were offering spectacles of terror, reinforcing obedience, feeding the architecture with the energy of collective fear. Witch trials across Europe spilled rivers of blood, every drop ensuring that the shadow remained exiled. Demons did not demand this, the system did. But blood is not always spilled with knife or fire. It is extracted emotionally. Fear is blood. Each time you shiver at the sight of horns, you bleed a little. Shame is blood. Each time you repress desire, you bleed. Guilt is blood. Each time you confess sins that are natural impulses, you bleed. The economy of demonology thrives on these leaks, harvesting your vitality without blade. This is why sermons linger on hellfire, why horror films linger on possession. Every tremble, every scream, every tear is blood flowing upward into the architecture. The genius of this system is that it harvests both extremes. Those who indulge forbidden impulses are taught to bleed guilt. Those who repress impulses bleed vitality in silence. Either way, blood flows. The demon becomes scapegoat for the leak. You blame it, fear it, feed it. But the demon is not culprit, is mask covering the true collector. The Goetia itself hints at this economy. Summoning rituals require offerings, candles, incense, sometimes blood. The magician believes he pays spirit for knowledge or power. But on a deeper level, the ritual dramatizes a universal law. Energy must be exchanged. The tragedy is that humanity has been tricked into spending endlessly, bleeding unconsciously into a system that gives nothing back but fear. The contracts of religion and empire ensure perpetual deficit, a spiritual debt never repaid. Yet within this bleak truth lies forbidden knowledge. Blood is not only loss, it is power. It is life force, passion, intensity. The very reason the architecture covets it is because of its potency. Wars harvested on grand scale, inquisitions on local scale, sermons and films on subtle scale. But the awakened can redirect it. Instead of bleeding unconsciously through fear, you can consecrate your blood, literal or emotional, toward integration. Anger becomes sword, not wound. Desire becomes fire of creation, not shame. Grief becomes compassion, not paralysis. The same essence that once fed the system can instead feed your sovereignty. Jung's shadow work echoes this. What you repress bleeds unconsciously. What you integrate becomes fuel. Fear transmuted becomes courage. Shame acknowledged becomes authenticity. Guilt dissolved becomes freedom. Every fragment reclaimed halts the leak, closes the wound, ends the sacrifice. The blood remains yours. The demon shrinks, revealed as part of you no longer starving, no longer bleeding into the architecture. This is why martyrdom was exalted. The bleeding saint is perfect economy, literal blood spilled. Symbolic blood extracted through collective awe, an ongoing harvest each time the story is retold. The architecture ensured that blood never dried, that generations would bleed devotion at memory of suffering. Demons had no hand in this. The system wrote the script. Blood, once spilled, became eternal currency. In modernity, the spectacle persists in subtler form. Horror films orchestrate ritual bloodletting without knife. Audiences scream, pulse races, fear surges, currency harvested. Media reports of possession go viral, millions bleed fascination and dread. Even memes extract blood through laughter tinged with unease. You may think you are entertained, but in truth, you are participating in ritual sacrifice of your own energy. The farm thrives invisibly, no altar required. So how do you break this economy? You cannot stop bleeding. Life itself is sacrifice. Every love, every grief, every rage draws blood. But you can choose where to spend it. To cry for yourself instead of system. To rage with clarity instead of compulsion. To desire without shame instead of secrecy. These are acts of reclamation. The blood is still given, but it feeds you, not the farm. It strengthens your wholeness instead of your chains. The forbidden truth is that demons never fed on blood. The architecture did. Demons were scapegoats, masks painted over fragments of yourself so you would not notice who was really drinking. To awaken is to realize that your blood, literal and emotional, is sacred currency. Stop offering unconsciously is to bankrupt the system. To consecrate it to your own integration is to rise sovereign. So ask yourself, where is your blood flowing now? Into rituals of fear, into sermons of shame, into stories of possession, or into the fire of your own becoming? For blood will always be spent. The only question is whether you will keep feeding the system or finally drink your own power. If blood is the currency, then contracts are the ledgers. The Ars Goetia is full of them, explicit pacts with spirits, detailed instructions on how to summon, what to offer, how to bind. But long before ink touched parchment, humanity was already signing contracts unconsciously, handing over fragments of itself in exchange for safety, belonging, or power. The genius of the system is not that it forces you to kneel, but that it convinces you to sign willingly. The grimoires. The pact appears dramatic. The magician calls forth a spirit, inscribes its sigil, lights candles, recites incantations, and sometimes seals the bargain with blood. On the surface, the pact is clear: knowledge or service in exchange for offering. But beneath the surface lies a deeper truth. The ritual is symbolic of something already happening every day. We are constantly entering contracts with invisible forces, not with demons and smoke, but with systems, authorities, and ideas that demand pieces of our shadow in exchange for approval. Religion is the greatest contract machine. Baptism, confirmation, confession, each framed as sacred covenant, each functioning as binding agreement. To confess is to declare, this part of me is evil. I sign it away to authority outside myself. To pray is to authorize transaction. I surrender my will in exchange for safety. These are not prayers, they are contracts. Invisible signatures renewed every week. The church understood that once people believed their desires and curiosities were demonic, they would willingly sign them over, binding themselves without chains. Trauma too becomes a contract. Child punished for anger signs a silent vow. I will never express this again. A girl shamed for desire signs, I will bury this fire forever. These contracts are not written in ink, but in survival. The shadow is exiled, the fragment becomes demon, and the contract ensures it stays locked away. Decades later, these agreements still govern behavior. Addiction, repression, obsessional, symptoms of contracts unbroken. The demon does not haunt it, is simply the face of a bargain made long ago. Exorcisms function as contract renewals. A body writhes, a priest chants, a crowd trembles. On the surface, the demon is being cast out. But in truth, the community is signing again, declaring, yes, demons are external enemies. Yes, only the priest holds power. Yes, we consent to this narrative. The ritual does not break. Contracts it, reaffirms them. Every scream is another signature, every prayer another seal. The Ars Goetia's Pacts mirror this paradox. To summon Baal, Paimon, Asmodeus, or Belial is not simply to call a monster, but to engage with a fragment of self. The contract dramatizes a choice. Will you continue to project this energy outward, binding yourself to fear, or will you reclaim it, binding yourself to integration? The danger is not the demon, it is the pact you choose to sign. Invite with blindness, and you surrender. Invite with awareness, and you reclaim. Modern life is riddled with contracts no less binding. Clicking, I agree to terms of service you never read, accepting debt that enslaves decades of your labor, swearing loyalty to corporations, nations, ideologies. Each one demands fragments. Your attention, your creativity, your autonomy. These two are goetic pacts, updated for digital age. You may not draw sigil in chalk, but you sign away sovereignty with every unexamined agreement. The system thrives because you do not question.
Oh, why do we keep signing?
Because contracts always promise something in return. Safety, belonging, absolution, knowledge, pleasure. The magician who bargains with demon does so because he desires what ordinary life denies. The believer confesses because absolution soothes shame. The traumatized child buries shadow because it promises love or survival. Contracts function because they exploit need. are never one-sided, they are exchanges. But the price is always higher than it appears. Awakening is recognizing that you can revoke consent. Contracts feel eternal because the system says they are. Once baptized, always bound. Once damned, never free. But this is propaganda. A contract exists only while both sides agree. The moment you withdraw consent, its power collapses. Shadow once exiled returns. Demon once feared dissolves into fragment. The architecture trembles because its foundation is not chains, but signatures. And signatures can be burned. This is why heretics are feared not, because they summon demons, but because they refuse contracts. They stop kneeling, stop confessing, stop repeating scripts. Their refusal exposes the lie that consent is required, that you can simply say no, that you can draft your own covenants, not with priests or spirits, but with yourself. Every mystic who declared union with shadow, every rebel who rejected dogma, every artist who embraced forbidden archetypes, they were tearing contracts, reclaiming fragments, breaking the farm. So the forbidden question is this: how many contracts have you signed unknowingly? How many fragments of yourself are locked away by vows of fear, shame, or obedience? And what would happen if you read those contracts aloud, recognized the trick, and refused? The answer is terrifying for the system, liberating for you. For the demon was never jailer, it was the clause you signed. And the moment you revoke, the demon returns home, not as enemy, but as power. The Ars Goetia whispers this truth beneath its fearsome masks. Its sigils are not chains, but keys. Its names are not threats, but invitations. Each spirit represents not a monster waiting to devour you, but a fragment of soul waiting for renegotiation. The forbidden act is not summoning, it is reclaiming. It's not exorcism, but integration. To sign a new contract with yourself, I accept this shadow. I no longer exile it. I am whole. That is the pact the system fears most, because it ends its harvest forever. Every system of control depends on one masterstroke. Redefine virtue as vice, and vice as virtue. This inversion is the beating heart of demonology, and the Ars Goetia is its most terrifying example. Not because it catalogs monsters, but because it reveals how natural human drives were recast as diabolical. The inverted moral code is not divine law. It is engineered architecture, crafted to keep humanity obedient by teaching them to fear themselves. Take desire. In its raw form, desire is sacred fire. It drives reproduction, creativity, exploration, intimacy. Without it, there is no art, no invention, no continuity of life. Yet under the inverted code, desire becomes lust, embodied in figures like Asmodeus. What was once vitality is reframed as sin. To feel longing is to risk damnation. To embrace passion is to consort with demons. The message is clear. To control humanity, demonize its most powerful engine. Sovereignty suffers the same fate. Belial in the Goetia embodies independence, self-rule, refusal of imposed authority. These qualities are essential to freedom. But under inversion, Belial becomes lawlessness, corruption, rebellion against God. Sovereignty is painted as arrogance, autonomy as blasphemy. The herd is taught to bow, to obey, to equate freedom with evil. The inverted code ensures that those who seek sovereignty will feel shame, guilt, and fear, bleeding energy back into the architecture. Knowledge, too, is inverted. Paimon represents mastery of secrets, command of intellect, forbidden wisdom. In a world where information liberates, knowledge is dangerous to any controlling system, and so it is demonized. The serpent offering fruit in Eden is not wisdom bringer, but corrupter. Curiosity becomes rebellion. Inquiry becomes heresy. To seek understanding beyond approved boundaries is to open the door to demons. Thus ignorance is sanctified, obedience exalted, and shadow grows thicker. Even invisibility is twisted. Spirits like Belial said to grant invisibility do not represent hiding in shadows, but the archetype of fragmentation, the parts of self unseen, repressed. In natural form, invisibility is protection, survival, adaptation. But under inversion, invisibility becomes deceit, trickery, corruption. To vanish is to sin. The fragment remains locked away, chained by narrative, unreachable until reclaimed. This moral inversion extends beyond individual archetypes, permeates entire social orders. Passion is reframed as temptation, anger as possession, sexuality as corruption, grief as weakness, rebellion as satanic. Each natural human impulse is inverted into threat. The result is a fractured humanity, terrified of itself. People live divided, half in obedience, half in exile. And the exiled halves are painted as demons, waiting to devour them. The architecture feeds on the fracture, harvesting the fear, shame, the guilt generated by this endless civil war of the soul. The brilliance of inversion is its double bind. If you indulge desire, you feel guilt. If you repress it, you feel emptiness. Either way, the system wins. If you seek sovereignty, you are demonized as arrogant. If you submit, you are praised but bled of vitality. If you seek knowledge, you risk heresy. If you remain ignorant, you remain enslaved. The inverted moral code ensures harvest no matter what choice is made. Every path leads to the same outcome. Energy flows upward. Shadow remains exiled. And yet the cracks show. Mystics across ages whispered that demons were not monsters, but mirrors. They saw through inversion. They recognized that what was called sin was often simply power reframed. The Gnostic texts spoke of archons feeding on ignorance. Jung taught that shadow integration, not banishment, leads to wholeness. Occultists hinted that the Goetia spirits were archetypes of psyche, waiting not for exorcism, but for dialogue. Each was punished, exiled, silenced, but their whispers remain, threading through history as forbidden knowledge. To awaken is to invert the inversion. To see lust as vitality, not sin. To see sovereignty as sacred, not corruption. To see knowledge as liberation, not blasphemy. To see shadow not as enemy, but as self. This is the most dangerous act because it dismantles the architecture at its root. If the herd no longer fears its own impulses, the system loses harvest. If humanity claims shadow as power, the architecture collapses. That is why inversion is enforced so ruthlessly. That is why heretics are burned, rebels silenced, seekers ridiculed. Control depends on keeping shadow locked behind masks of fear. But the forbidden truth is this: demons were never evil. They were archetypes punished for embodying virtues the system could not tolerate. Asmodeus is not corrupter, but flame of passion. Belial is not lawless, but sovereign. Paman is not deceiver, but teacher. Baal is not trickster, but fragment hidden for survival. To reclaim them is not to fall, it is to rise. So ask yourself, how much of your life has been lived under an inverted code? How many times have you called your own vitality sin, your own freedom arrogance, your own curiosity blasphemy? How much energy have you bled into a system that thrives on this inversion? And most haunting of all, what would happen if you inverted the inversion? If you called your desires sacred, your sovereignty holy, your curiosity divine, the answer is forbidden because it is liberating. It would end the architecture's grip. It would return the fragments. It would make you whole. If the inverted moral code is the script, then rituals are the performance. They are the engines that keep the architecture alive, embedding fear and obedience into daily life until it becomes second nature. Rituals are not confined to temples or grimoires. They are everywhere, woven into churches, schools, politics, entertainment, even the glow of your phone screen. The demon does not need to appear in smoke and fire. The ritual summons it for you again and again, until the shadow is so familiar as an enemy that you forget it was ever part of you. Consider the exorcism. On the surface, it is a holy battle, priest versus demon, cross versus possession. But look closer. It is a carefully staged drama. The writhing body, the chanting voices, the sprinkling of water, the gasps of the audience. The ritual is theater, and its function is reinforcement. Each act renews the contract. Demons are real, external, terrifying, and only the priest can banish them. The possessed may be cured, but the crowd leaves bound more tightly to the system. Every exorcism is not a liberation. It is a renewal of belief, a feeding of the architecture. The sermon works the same way. Each week, believers gather, listen to vivid descriptions of hell, temptation, demonic snares. Children absorb the images before they can question. Adults internalize the guilt. The ritual is repetitive, predictable, but that is its power. Fear becomes muscle memory. The community bonds through shared terror. The demon need never appear. The ritual has already summoned it into imagination, where it does the architecture's work without resistance. But rituals extend far beyond the church. Hollywood has become cathedral of the modern world, and horror films its mass liturgies. The theater darkens, the screen glows, the sound crescendos. Horned shadows crawl across walls, voices hiss, bodies twist in possession. The audience screams, laughs nervously, clutches armrests. Energy rises, fear bleeds, ritual complete. Whether they believe in demons or not, every viewer has participated in a summoning. Every scream is blood, every gasp is offering. The demon projected is less important than the ritual of fear that reaffirms the architecture. Social media spreads these rituals into billions of hands. A viral clip of alleged possession circulates, watched by millions. Memes of demons circulate, half joking, half serious. Each share is a micro-ritual, each comment a chant, each laugh an offering. Algorithms amplify what triggers strongest reactions: fear, outrage, disgust. They are digital priests, ensuring the rituals continue endlessly. No candles or crosses are needed. The smartphone has become the grimoire, the scroll, the incantation, the viral image, the sigil. Even politics is ritualized demonology. Leaders brand opponents as monsters, threats, forces of evil. Crowds chant, wave flags, roar in unison. The ritual is identical to ancient exorcisms, only the demon's mask has changed. The scapegoat is no longer a spirit but a human group, demonized for convenience. The crowd bleeds fear and fury, the leader harvests power, the architecture thrives. Ritual does not care if its object is literal demon or political enemy, only cares that the energy flows. Sports arenas, too, echo these dynamics. Chants rise like prayers, fans roar as one, symbols adorn bodies and banners. The ritual is ecstasy instead of terror, but energy still surges, still harvested. Archetypes play out on the field: heroes, villains, battles. The crowd is possessed by passion, offering their vitality in collective sacrifice. Ritual does not require fear, it only requires intensity. Joy bleeds as readily as dread, and the architecture feeds on both. But not all rituals are public. Many are intimate, invisible. A child told not to speak of nightmares performs ritual silence. A person confessing sins they do not understand enacts ritual of guilt. A family praying over meals repeats ritual obedience. Even laughter at ghost stories by firelight is ritual rehearsal of fear. Each act may feel small, but repetition engraves the archetype deeper. Rituals everywhere, rituals unending. And yet rituals are not inherently enslavement. They are engines. The system has hijacked them, steering them toward fear and obedience. But the awakened can reclaim them. Lighting a candle not to banish but to welcome shadow. Now drawing a sigil not to summon monster but to integrate fragment. Chanting not in fear but in affirmation of sovereignty. Rituals can be rewritten. Their power lies not in form but in intent. The same ceremony that enslaves can liberate when consciousness returns. This is why mystics always create rituals of their own. To break the architecture, they consecrate new ceremonies. They face shadows and mirrors. They meditate with demons. They inscribe sigils as affirmations. These acts are dangerous to the system because they redirect energy inward instead of upward. They feed wholeness, not the farm. That is why such rituals are condemned as heresy. To integrate shadow is to starve the architecture. So ask yourself, how many rituals do you perform daily without knowing? How many prayers, jokes, reactions, or chants feed the very system you wish to escape? Waken is not to escape ritual, it is to see ritual, to notice, to question, to choose, to ask. Who benefits from this performance? Who collects the energy of my fear, my laughter, my outrage? And most important, what new rituals can I consecrate so that my energy feeds me, not the architecture? For rituals are everywhere and they will never vanish. So the only question is whether you will keep performing theirs or begin writing your own. Awakening is never a single moment. It is a slow tearing of veils, a disorienting recognition that the demons you feared were masks placed over pieces of yourself. When you first glimpse the system, the architecture looks unshakable. Churches, grimoires, movies, politics, all repeating the same narrative of fear. But then something cracks. Symbol flickers differently. A ritual feels staged. A contract reads false. And suddenly, the prison walls reveal themselves for what they are: painted illusions sustained by your belief. The first stage of awakening is recognition. You see that the demon is not external. Asmodeus is your desire, long buried and shamed. Belial is your sovereignty, chained and slandered. Paman is your curiosity, demonized into heresy. Baal is your fragmentation, your invisibility, your hidden face. These spirits are not invaders, they are you, waiting in exile. The Goetia is not a catalog of enemies, but a mirror of forbidden fragments. To recognize this is terrifying, because it means the monster is not something you can cast out. It is something you must embrace. The second stage is grief. You realize how many years you have bled into the system. Every prayer whispered in fear, every confession of sin, every scream at shadow on screen, each was offering of blood, contract renewed. You grieve the fragments of yourself you lost, the power you gave away, the years you lived divided. This grief is necessary. It is the wound exposed. Without grief, you cannot reclaim. The third stage is rebellion. You begin to question every ritual, every contract, every symbol. Why should desire be sin? Why should curiosity be heresy? Why should sovereignty be blasphemy? You begin to invert the inversion, reclaiming what was stolen. You look at Asmodeus and say, "You are not corrupter, you are my fire." You look at Belial and say, "You are not lawless, you are my freedom." You look at Paman and say, "You are not deceiver, you are my knowledge." You look at Baal and say, "You are not trickster, you are my hidden face." Each act of reclamation breaks a contract. Each fragment reintegrated weakens the architecture. But the most dangerous stage is integration. For here you are no longer content to review. Begin to build new rituals, new contracts, new symbols. You stop feeding the architecture unconsciously and start consecrating energy to yourself. You write pacts not with priests or spirits, but with your own shadow. I accept you. I claim you. Will not exile you again. This is forbidden act, because it starves the system. It takes the very machinery used to enslave symbols, rituals, contracts them inward, using them for wholeness. Integration does not mean indulgence. To embrace desire is not to become enslaved by lust. To reclaim anger is not to explode in violence. To claim sovereignty is not to descend into arrogance. Integration is balance. It is what Baphomet embodies: union of opposites, reconciliation of fragments. It is the knowledge that shadow, when claimed, becomes strength, but when repressed, becomes demon. To integrate is to stop bleeding unconsciously, to redirect blood into life instead of farm. Awakening also demands solitude. The herd thrives on shared rituals of fear. To step outside is to risk exile. Friends may call you deluded, family may whisper heresy, institutions may brand you dangerous. But solitude is not emptiness, is sovereignty. Better to walk whole in shadow than fractured in light. Better to embrace your demons as fragments than to cast them out and remain incomplete. The system will not applaud your awakening, it will resist it. That resistance is proof of its fear. The final realization is the most haunting. The system never needed real demons. It only needed your agreement. The faces painted on spirits, the symbols inverted, the rituals repeated, these were tools to secure consent. You signed away fragments by believing the story. You fed the farm with every fearful thought. The demons never hunted you, they waited for you. In the moment you turn toward them, they return not as enemies, but as powers. This is awakening, to see the architecture as cage built of fear. To recognize your shadow in every demon mask, to revoke contracts and draft new ones with yourself, to transform rituals of fear into ceremonies of integration. Awakening does not destroy the system, but it renders it powerless over you. Its walls still stand, but you walk through them. Its rituals still repeat, but you no longer bleed. Its symbols still appear, but but you read them differently. The architecture loses harvest, and you reclaim yourself. So the question is no longer whether demons are real. The question is, will you keep obeying the architecture that taught you to fear your own fragments? Or will you awaken, face the forbidden mirror, and walk whole again? For the Goetia was never a book of monsters. It was always a map home. The Ars Goetia was never a catalog of monsters, but a mirror of fragments you were taught to fear. The forbidden choice is yours. Exile them and keep bleeding, or face them and walk whole. Which pact will you sign? Comment below and subscribe. Our descent is only beginning.